Hey everybody. Um, so there was originally a different video that I had planned to make for today, a continuation of my series about dating coaches. And I am still planning on recording that video today if I have time. So hopefully that video will be coming out later today as well. But this was a topic I felt like I wanted to talk about. It's really been pressing on my conscience the last couple of days. And for me, it felt important to say something about, pretty as a matter of some kind of importance and urgency. This is not the sort of video I usually make. I'm not really one to talk about controversies going on with well-known figures. It's not that I don't have an interest in that kind of topic. I do, but I prefer to be a consumer of that sort of content rather than really talking about it myself. A lot of the time, don't really feel like there's much for me to add to the conversation. But in this particular instance, I feel pretty strongly about this particular person and what they're doing and saying. And I also think that he is an example of someone we can really learn from. It's a really teachable moment in terms of our own motives and intentions for doing things. So before I get into my own opinions and thoughts, I'm going to assume that if you're watching this video, you know who the Dad Challenge Podcast is. If you don't, it's a channel here on YouTube run by a guy called Josh Barbour. He's an ex-worship pastor. He's no longer a pastor, and for the past few years, he's been making videos exposing family vloggers and mommy vloggers and the problems associated with putting children online without their consent, which is a pretty noble cause. But, more recently, he's been the target of some pretty fierce criticism, which in my opinion is totally justified. So I'm not going to go into some of the more obvious criticisms that have been leveled against him, because other content creators have done that extremely well, and it's just going to be more repetition if I go over those arguments again. I don't feel like doing that. So what I'm going to do is link some of my favorite videos and favorite content creators who've covered this topic in the description box of this video. Just in order, I really love Cold Tea Queen's videos about the Dad Challenge podcast. Apoc makes some really good critique videos of him, and he's very funny as well. Sincerely, Sharon has brought out some videos about the Dad Challenge podcast. She tends to be kind of on the kinder, fairer side of the spectrum when it comes to talking about him. Radiantbritt is another brilliant content creator who has talked about Josh Barbour and the problems with him. So any of those channels, check out their videos. They have some really amazing videos, and they cover the kind of the most common arguments and criticisms leveled against the Dad Challenge podcast. So I'm not going to go over those in this video. I want to offer some more nuanced perspectives that are not spoken about as much. And I want to offer my thoughts and opinions that maybe others haven't thought of yet, that haven't been given as much attention, and perhaps provide some new insight. I also just want to say that this video is not being made for Josh's benefit. At this point, I think it's pretty clear from the amount of criticism he's received that he's not open either to receiving criticism in a healthy way or to debating people who have leveled this kind of criticism against him, or to changing his ways in any significant manner. He's not open to feedback, and he tends to try to just tear down the person who's giving the criticism rather than address any of their arguments. So when it comes to a person like that, there really is no point in trying to reach him and trying to get him to change his mind. Many others have tried. People have tried to engage with him. Several content creators who've criticized him have invited him to debate with them, and he has not accepted any of those invitations. And Josh hasn't changed. I think if anything, he's getting worse. And so I think we can deduce from all of that this is not really a man who is interested in anyone's feedback or criticism at this point. What he is doing seems to be meeting his objectives for himself, and which in my opinion are mainly financial objectives at this point. You know, if he's making money out of what he's doing, and if making money and getting kind of some level of fame and power is what's important to him, why on earth would we expect him to stop doing what he's doing? So I'm not making this video for his benefit. He, as I've mentioned, he simply finds a way to try and attack the person who's making the criticism rather than engaging in any kind of mature debate with them. I think that's really unfortunate, but it tells me everything that I need to know about his ability to engage with feedback. And another thing I'm not going to be doing in this video is using any of the clips from his videos. I'm not going to be using his YouTube videos or content in this video, even though I've worked out how to react to videos in my videos now. But I'm not going to be using his content in my video because he has a tendency to copyright claim and copyright strike people, and I don't even want to take that risk. So I'm going to refer you to those channels who have critiqued him. Many of them have included some of the most problematic clips from his videos, and you can refer to those, and I highly encourage you to do so. In fact, a lot of what I'm going to say is not going to make sense unless you have a pretty good background understanding of the main arguments against Josh and the Dad Challenge podcast. So go and watch those other videos to see the actual content that Josh makes, which is problematic. I'm not going to be including it in this video. If you want to go and check out Josh's content on his own channel, of course, you're welcome to do that. But I don't want to get copyright claimed or copyright struck. I want to just keep this video as being purely about my own commentary on the situation. So as I was saying, this video is not being made for Josh. It's not an appeal to Josh or his better nature, although of course I would welcome him to watch this video. It would be great if he did consider the points that I was making. That would be first prize, and I would of course love it if any of what I said caused some sort of light to go off inside his own head, but I don't expect that based on his past behavior. And I'm not making this video for him. This video is for his fans, people who might still hold him in high regard. And it's also for people who might be questioning his behavior. And I know there are many people like that, people who still maybe watch his content but feel uncomfortable with a lot of the stuff that he does. And it's for potentially new viewers who might be considering checking out his channel, or who might have only watched 1 or 2 of his videos and think he's really entertaining and don't know about the problems associated with him. One of the things which persuaded me to make a video about this topic was, I believe it was Radiantbritt who mentioned that it's really important that people continue to talk about the problems associated with what Josh is doing, because then that kind of commentary is going to get into the algorithm. At the moment, when you type in the Dad Challenge Podcast into the YouTube search function, most of what comes up is Josh's own content. Even when you type in things like problems with the Dad Challenge Podcast, or critique of the Dad Challenge Podcast, or exposing the Dad Challenge Podcast, you'll be kind of met with a lot of his own videos and not too much. It's quite difficult to actually find the criticism of him unless you specifically know which content creators you're looking for. It seems as if the only ones really speaking out about him at this stage are the small content creators, people who have like less than 10,000 subscribers. And I think that's awesome. I think it's actually says a lot that these small content creators are willing to go out on a limb and stand up to someone who's much bigger than them. I'm absolutely minuscule on YouTube at this point. I'm, still getting started, and yet I want to do my bit to raise awareness about this very problematic person. Those are my preliminary thoughts before I get into what I really wanted to say about Josh. So a little bit of background about him. Josh comes from a very neglectful, abusive background. He was very poor growing up. His mother was pretty much an absentee mother in a lot of ways. Josh had to fend for himself a lot as he was growing up. He experienced abuse. He experienced extreme deprivation. His father wasn't in the picture. And he has, various series of videos on his channel talking about the difficulties that he experienced growing up. I'm going to switch my heater on a little bit higher because I'm actually pretty cold in here, and I hope it might kind of bring an orange glow to my face. I'm really sorry about that, but I don't want to freeze. So there we go. Oh my goodness, that's too strong. Okay, so hopefully hopefully that's not too bad. Okay, so Josh came from a very poor and traumatic background, and I know a little bit something about this. I mean, I had a very difficult childhood myself, and I think I have a lot of insight due to the issues that I experienced growing up, and the healing journey that I've gone, and the insight that I've gained into myself. I would say I have a lot of I have a lot of thoughts about how that can affect the way someone thinks and the way someone's personality develops. I'm very interested in human nature and the way that a person's background and experiences shapes the way that they interact with others. So Josh, for me, has been a very interesting case study in that regard. It's funny because in the early days of his channel or his early videos, he used to say that talking to his audience on YouTube was his therapy. I don't think it's something he says much anymore, but I always found that to be a very interesting statement for him to make. It's as if he's admitting that he has a lot of issues to work through in himself, and he's kind of making use of his audience and the popularity and sort of relative fame and clout that he's getting from YouTube to help him process and get over some of his past trauma. That's how I interpret a lot of what he does and says. To me, so much of his own insecurities and his own past trauma actually comes out in the things that he says and does, and I don't think he's aware of it. But I can certainly recognize it as a person, as a person who's had a lot of the same pain myself in my background. I can see it in others. But anyway, so Josh had a difficult childhood, and he went on to find solace in being very heavily involved with the church. And this took like various forms. The church looked after him and provided for him in many ways when his mother wasn't able to. And for Josh, the church was really his safe space. And this kind of culminated in him going to a college to become a worship pastor, and him getting a job as a worship pastor in a pretty big church. And I've watched the entire series of videos that Josh did about this particular time in his life. He has a whole 6 videos, could be 7 videos in a series called Why I'm an Ex-Pastor, and he describes his entire career at this church and the work that he did, and it all culminates in him getting fired from this church eventually. And I have some thoughts about that. When I first watched this series of videos, I immediately felt very sympathetic for Josh. To me, it was very obvious that at this church, he had found a place where he felt like he could gain a sense of belonging, approval, validation, a place where he could build up his sense of self, his sense of self-worth, a sense of being able to be praised and approved of and loved. Somewhere where he could probably earn the kind of adulation and care and building up that he probably didn't receive as a child. That is what it seemed like to me. It really seemed as if he invested so much of himself in this job of being a worship pastor. As I say, I watched the entire video series, and it was very long. Each video was, some videos were over an hour, but it was a very long series, and he goes into quite a lot of detail. And the overwhelming impression I had was that Josh just really wanted to be somebody at this church. and he worked very hard to achieve that. He clearly has a talent for, video and sound editing. I mean, I think you can tell that by watching his videos. They're quite professionally done. I mean, they're not like anything truly outstanding. I wouldn't say that they're, wildly out of the ordinary, but it's certainly, like, considering the fact that he was never formally trained and he taught himself how to do video and sound editing. I mean, it is pretty impressive, and this is something he did at the church that he worked for. So Josh built up something of a career at this church. He was the worship pastor, so he would lead the worship on, in church services on a Sunday. And if you've never been to a modern evangelical church, which is the kind of church that Josh worked at, they have a worship team, which is kind of like a music band up on the stage, who leads the congregation in a song. The worship band kind of plays keyboards, guitar, various instruments, and they have singers who basically, they almost put on a bit of a performance in Sunday services. I've been to several of these sorts of churches, and honestly, these worship bands are often very talented, very good singers, good musicians, and their main job is to kind of stir up emotion in the crowd. And I think that's important to keep in mind. I've personally, I don't go to church anymore, and there's a good reason for that. But one of the issues that I had with church when I used to attend was that for me, the worship band always seemed to be a little bit manipulative in terms of the emotional response that they tried to evoke from the congregation. It was always kind of designed to make you feel a particular way. The style of singing, the songs that were chosen, the way that they'd get soft at certain points in the service and loud at other points, it all just seemed very, very kind of carefully orchestrated to build up these feelings in the congregation. I always had a bit of a problem with that. I don't like my emotions being manipulated. I mean, sometimes you expect your emotions to be kind of manipulated when you go to see a movie or you listen to a sad song. You're sort of prepared for the fact that your emotions are going to be kind of manipulated somewhat. But when you go to church, I just feel that's between you and your relationship with God, and I don't really think that it's anyone's business to kind of try and dictate that experience for you. Like, yes, perform great music, and yes, kind of put on a good service. That's fine, but I always felt that the worship team was kind of being directed to make people in the congregation feel a particular way. So that the overall impression was that this was, I don't know, it just always seemed to be about making people feel really emotional. And faith and religion really doesn't have to be an emotional thing. Sometimes it can just be as simple as wanting to go to church to pray and to honor what you believe. Anyway, that's neither here nor there, but I gather that Josh was really good at this side of things. He was very good at kind of that typical evangelical church method of evoking feelings in the congregation. And I strongly believe this is what he still does on his YouTube channel to this day. he knows what feelings he's going for, and he knows what kind of words to say and how to say it. And even like, how to use people's morals to make them feel a particular way, much like churches do. So Josh seemed to me, like from what he described, he seemed to excel in this role of being a worship pastor in this church, but eventually he was fired from this role. And if you listen to his account of events, he believes that he was fired because he was becoming too influential as a worship pastor, and he believes that the executive pastor was basically jealous of him and didn't like the fact that Josh was becoming very popular and successful in the church. Josh claims that the church grew by several hundred members whilst he was in his position as worship pastor. And I mean, who am I to contradict him? I certainly don't know. I can't comment on the validity of that claim. I know nothing about the circumstances really, aside from what Josh has said. But this is what Josh says. And I do think just the mere fact that he makes this claim is interesting. Whenever someone says that they were fired because someone else was jealous of them and jealous that they were becoming too popular, too influential, I always take a bit, I have a bit of a double take when someone says that. I'm not saying that it can never be the case. There certainly are circumstances where a powerful person in an organization doesn't like the attention and power and popularity that someone who is beneath them is getting, and they feel threatened by that person. That can happen. So I'm not discounting that that's a possibility. But I do think you have to pay attention to the person also who is making that claim that someone else is jealous of them. This is something I kind of had to get over. When I was younger, I fell into the habit of thinking that maybe, anything, when I had any kind of difficulty with someone, or even perceived difficulty with someone, I would sometimes fall into the habit of thinking that that person was jealous of me. I rarely think that way these days, not because jealousy doesn't happen, but just because I think people give way too much credence and power and weight to the emotion of jealousy. I don't think jealousy really plays as much of a role in people's actions as we often think it does. And I also know that there is usually a good way to bring around someone who might be feeling feelings of jealousy. And a lot of the time, people aren't actually jealous of us. They just might not understand us. Sometimes different personalities just don't gel. And I think when people don't understand why someone dislikes them or doesn't get along with them, people are far too ready to call it jealousy when it might not be that. And this is just something I've learned as I've got older and more mature and gained more insight into people. Jealousy is not as big a factor in why people do what they do as we think it is. Jealousy tends to be the kind of emotion that causes most people a lot of shame. Most people don't like feeling jealous of others. They don't want to feel jealous of others. And I don't think most people's first instinct is to get rid of that person that they're jealous of. I'm not saying it doesn't happen, but I don't think it happens as often as maybe some people would have you believe. Most people, when they feel jealous of someone else, actually turn that feeling in on themselves, and they feel shame about that feeling of jealousy. So anyway, Josh kind of claims that one of the reasons he was fired was the executive pastor had a certain level of resentment of him because Josh was becoming very popular and influential. And I think that's an interesting claim for him to make. I'm not saying it's untrue, but I just think it's interesting. I think it's just something we need to take note of, because it does speak to someone who perhaps thinks they're special or would like to think that they are special. The other reason that Josh claims he was fired is because he took parental leave. Now in Canada, according to Josh, you are allowed to take, I think he said it was 9 months, 10 months, something like that. It's quite a long time of leave as a father or as a mother, I think. Both parents are allowed to take leave when you either have a child or adopt a child. And Josh had recently adopted his nephews. And so he found out that he was eligible for this paternal leave. And he told the church he was going to be taking this paternal leave, which is protected by law. Now, here's, again, something which kind of threw up a little bit of a flag for me when I heard this. I worked in corporate for quite a long time before becoming a teacher, and I was in supervisory positions on 2 different occasions, 2 different jobs. I managed a team, and of course, I had people reporting to me, and I also had people that I was reporting to. And I learned quite a lot about, organizational politics and dynamics, and the right and wrong ways of addressing people, especially people who are senior to you. And although, yes, you as an employee have certain rights that you have, and certain things you're entitled to, and yes, you should be treated a certain way, which is fair and just by the company and by your managers. All too often, I saw colleagues and people that I worked with, I saw people make the mistake of being too heavy-handed about the things they were entitled to. And in my humble opinion, this is a mistake that Josh made. There is a right and a wrong way of approaching it when you want something from the company. Whether it's something you're entitled to by law, whether it's something that you have a right to, or whether it's a favor, there is a right and a wrong way of doing this. And in my opinion, Josh handled this in the wrong way. I'm not saying that he was wrong. I'm saying, in my opinion, there was a better way he could have gone about it, which probably would have preserved his position in the church. Perhaps, not definitely, but I certainly wouldn't have gone about it in the way that he did, based on everything I've learned about how to work with other people. So he informed his leadership at the church that he was taking this paternity leave. Instead of letting them know about this legal right that he had, that he had just found out about, if it had been me, what I would have done is I would have let them know I just adopted 2 children, and that I needed time to settle the kids in and that I also had been advised that I was entitled to X amount of months of paternal leave, and that I didn't want to leave the church in the lurch. I didn't want to kind of abandon them at short notice, and so I wanted to have a meeting with them just to determine how we could work out a system where I could take my paternity leave for the benefit of myself and my family, and also not just kind of abandon my duties at the church. I personally believe that is the right way to handle it, because you're keeping that goodwill. You're saying, like, yes, I have these rights that I'm entitled to, but I care about my job. I care about what I've built in this job and at this church, and I care about you and about this team, and I want to work out something that's going to work for both of us. And I don't know of any manager that I've ever worked for, except maybe one who is extremely unreasonable, who would respond badly to that. I think they would have respected the fact that I came to them and was willing to work something out with them, rather than just informing them I was taking the leave, which is the approach that Josh took. He informed them he was taking the leave. He didn't ask. He didn't kind of try to negotiate some sort of like exit strategy. And I'm sure there are people who are going to argue, well, it was his right to take the paternity leave. He had every right to just leave. But I think if you listen to his story, he says that he was already having tension with the management of the church over various issues. And I think if he really cared about coming back to his job after his paternity leave, which he says he does, he says he didn't want to leave his job. He wanted to come back when his paternity leave was finished. So in that case, I think he would have been wise to handle the whole situation in a more diplomatic way. But instead, he just kind of announced to them and I'm sure what they would have regarded as quite an arrogant way, that he was just taking the paternity leave and they just had to deal with it. Now, knowing what he would have known about his tenuous position at the church, that just doesn't really make sense. So anyway, he just kind of informed them that he wanted to take his paternity leave and he would see them in however many months. They responded and asked him to come to have monthly check-ins with them, monthly meetings, even whilst he was on leave, like performance meetings where they could just discuss issues that they had been having with his work. Frankly, if I wanted to keep my job, I think that's a fairly small concession to agree to. I would have said yes to that. Josh basically said no, he's on paternity leave and he's not going to do that. And I just think he handled the whole thing in kind of a heavy-handed way. And I think what he did was set up a power struggle between himself and the management of the church, where they felt like they couldn't work with him because he just kind of wanted his own way in this situation. That's how it looked to me. And yet at the same time, I was very sympathetic when I heard his story, because I thought, it did sound as if they'd been taking advantage of him for quite a while. And I do understand why he felt so frustrated with the church at this point, and why he would have seen the paternity leave as this like lifeline to give him a break that he really, really needed to just recharge his batteries. And I just feel he didn't really handle it in a particularly wise or diplomatic way. So let's move on from that. Since after leaving the church, it's pretty clear that Josh had a lot of wounds, emotional wounds from that situation. He felt very, in my opinion, listening to his story, it's pretty clear that he felt quite rejected by this community that he had thought were kind of like family to him. And I think someone with his background, someone with his issues would have taken that really hard. And I think you can also see that, you can see that he's still really wounded by the whole experience, by the fact that he's made so many videos describing his experience. And he even released the entire transcript, the audio transcript of the meeting, or audio recording, sorry, of the meeting that resulted in him getting fired. And I don't think anyone would actually do that, release that recording to the general public, unless they really were invested in people knowing how upset they were and in having people on their side. Josh's motivation in doing that is to have people on his side. And that tells me everything that I need to know about the fact that he hasn't healed from this experience. And that he wants to be seen as this person who is in the right and who has the moral high ground, and someone who is on the side of right. He wants people to see him as being right. I don't think Josh is someone who can actually let that go. It's very important to him that people see him in a particular light. And that's kind of a dead giveaway of unhealed trauma. Emotionally mature, healthy adults are able to recognize that sometimes situations in life just don't work out. If you're wise, you see them as growing and learning experiences, but not everyone is going to understand you, and not everyone is going to always see you in the way that you want to be perceived, and people, those, like, if you're emotionally healthy and mature, if you have a strong sense of self-esteem, you don't need to be viewed by everyone in a particular light. Your sense of self is enough to carry you through a situation like that. Obviously, it sucks to be fired. I mean, that is certainly a knock to your sense of self, and I can certainly understand having a good vent about it. But to take it to the extreme that Josh did, where he published a whole video series about it and released the audio recording about it, and was kind of this close to being embroiled in a legal battle with the church over the whole thing, I mean, that really just shows you that the guy isn't able to let it go. And I mean, what does it really mean in the end? Yes, he experienced treatment which may have been unjust, but so have we all. When you've experienced trauma, any time that you are treated badly or unfairly by someone else, it re-triggers you to the trauma that you experienced in your past. And so it makes it feel so much worse than it actually is. I've kind of got to the point in my life where I can see negative experiences and adversity as, like, yes, they can be experiences that are very hurtful and painful and very difficult, and certainly, like, they can take you to a bad place, and of course you need support and help to get over them, but ultimately at some point you have to reframe them. If you want to keep moving forward in your life, you have to find a way to reframe them as something that you grew from and learned from, and you can't continue to, like, cling on to that sense of injustice. So that's just something that stood out to me from that whole story that Josh told about his past. And I think we can see it in the way that he wants to be perceived in his whole fight against family vloggers and mommy vloggers. He is kind of obsessed with being in the right. You know, no matter what he does, no matter how poorly he behaves, he is hell-bent on justifying his actions, and so that he can be perceived in the most kind of exalted light possible by the most number of people possible. And that's always a dead giveaway of someone, as I say, it's a dead giveaway of someone with unhealed trauma, someone who carries a deep unhealed wounds inside them, where they're looking to fill those empty holes with the validation and approval of others, and the idea of being wrong, and of being chastised, and of someone saying that you've done something in a less than perfect way, that perhaps there's some mistake that you've made, or that you've been in the wrong, or that there's something you need to change about yourself or correct or improve in yourself. That's almost unbearable to a person who has this really fragile sense of self, which was never validated and properly kind of supported when they were growing up. You know, a child who receives the correct amount of positive regard and love and care and support and all the parental resources that they needed, emotional and financial and in every other way, that who grew up with this really secure sense of self, doesn't need to be excessively defensive, or they don't need to be always right or always approved of in every single situation, because their sense of self is robust enough to handle those little knocks and those little mistakes that we can all learn from. And to me, as I say, Josh is someone who, like, his entire persona and all his behavior screams someone who has a fragile sense of self. I'm going to talk about that more in my next video, because I've been talking for a while now and I have lots to say on this topic. So stay tuned for the next video, and we'll continue our discussion about Josh from the Dad Challenge Podcast.